were a lot of kind of key things to point out when we talk about value proposition that were kind of consistent messages that we saw across a lot of the tables. So of course, the number one that was up there was being part of the community and networking and sharing and collaboration. That was kind of a really key theme that we saw. Education, public education, shared resources. That was another kind of consistent one that we see. Basic advocacy tools and skills development was another one. As well as usually when you see a bunch of them in one bullet point, that means I'm trying to consolidate them together. Developing of better ideas for diversity and people from different backgrounds. So these are some of the kind of the key words for a value proposition. That would mean, why would a patron or a principal member want to join? So do you think we capture this as you're looking at this? Am I seeing shaking heads? Yes.
Do we have, oh, Tim, there's one right here on the, yeah.
It's just a simple question. Are there like action verbs that might go with these ideas?
Yeah, I think definitely. So I think this is a matter of refining all of those, refining the language from all the ideas that were put out from the paper. So I just wanted to throw these up there at you to make sure that we're getting the right concepts. But I think there's another kind of secondary exercise, as you said, is really kind of refining what those words will be. That's representative of all of these ideas in terms of value proposition.
So the idea of value is really sort of an equation of cost and benefit. And what I see is a list of benefits. And what I'm not clear on, if I'm a patron or principal member of my organization or whatever, is what are the expectations of my organization for being involved? Because I think that's a really important part of this equation that we're not presenting. And so it's kind of hard to understand the value proposition without understanding the other part of the equation.
So if I could just make sure that I'm hearing you right, is that you're asking, what's the involvement of a member? What's the commitment that I need to make? Yeah. So I think, we can talk about this, but I think it's very fluid at this point. So you can put it in as name to say, yeah, listen, I'm going to join the community and I'll help vote on whatever projects that might come on. Or it might be, I really want to be involved and I want to be, on the executive committee, or I want to work on projects, or I want to propose a project to be involved in it. So I think at this point, it's really fluid. And I think if we define it too closely, we might lose that spectrum.
I think maybe the one only expectation that we have in the charter from last year was that we really want people to engage in the annual meeting, either online or in person. That's the really only big expectation that we wanted, but it's not a requirement.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to move on to benefits, and I'm sorry for this animation, but I had to throw it on from another presentation. So yeah, you guys got a lot, and I know this is really small print because holy moly, you guys have a lot of ideas, which is kind of cool. But the ones that I put in bold are they were the benefits that were already listed on the form that were consistently checked off between tables. Maybe not all the tables, but we saw multiple tables kind of voting for these types of benefits that could rise to the top. So things like contributing to the mission, exchange of information and experiences, opportunities to engage, contributing to the strengthening and becoming a voice within the community. So I think those all kind of came out and kind of bubbled to the top. But the one thing I also want to point out is that a lot of questions came out from the bullet point that says receive training to become a certified SCI engagement professional. And you'll see in those parentheses were a lot of the questions that came out from the other tables of like, what does this mean? So I think for clarification, actually, the project that was just presented by John and Anita can kind of help clarify what this certification is, because it's really a project that they're proposing. So Anita, can you, I know, I caught you right as soon as you took a bite of a cookie. So, but would you mind just kind of clarifying a little bit of what we mean by certified and engagement kind of professional?
So what we were really proposing is for individuals who are interested in engaging in research beyond the role of just a participant, we need to educate them so that they're able to engage with researchers in a meaningful way. And the idea of creating an online education training tool that then allows them to become certified NASCIC SCI research consultants gives credibility to the knowledge that they have. And that in turn will provide that level of value that the research community will see with them in being able to engage with them on their projects. And it helps to move us away from that whole idea of tokenism, where our opinions are validated and they contain value and meaning.
And we are going to have a long discussion about this once we finish this part. Okay, John?
And I just want to check in with our friend Alton online because he had a question about that as well in terms of what that means. And I'm hoping that what Anita had presented and what was presented really addresses his question specifically.
Can you let us know what that question is, Carrie?
It was in regard to what does the certified SCI engagement, what does that mean?
Okay, so I'll just touch on that real quick. The concept, I think, as me and Anita sort of discuss it, the Rick Hansen Foundation, which is not the Institute, Foundation is much more inclusivity and access, developed a curriculum on universal design and accessibility. As we know, a lot of people with disabilities have said, hey, I know all about accessibility and have consulted out their services. The problem is they don't understand building design or building code and stuff like that. And so they worked with the Canadian Standards Association to develop a certification course for universal design. And now you've got a cohort of people, both people with disabilities, city planners, architects, who have this certification as a universal RHF certified universal design professional. So they can then contract out their services to whoever's looking to develop universal design. So I think that's sort of the model we're looking at, is the standard of skill that you can be assured if you engage with this person, they are qualified to contribute to your project.
Great. I just wanted to check in with our folks online. Were there any questions?
Anyone have any questions online?
No, it's clear. The presentation earlier specified everything for me. Thanks.
Yeah, everything's good.
Everything's good. All right, we got thumbs up from the online folks, the virtual guys. Great, great. One thing before we move on to the next phase is there were a couple of comments that came in were about the vision needs to remain under the members' control, and then there was another comment, but to make sure that it's explicit to who can participate in this. So that was kind of key, and I think. Okay, so we're going to move on to.
A lot of ideas.
There's lots of ideas, so I got a lot of work to do. Yeah. So we're going to refine this, and sorry again for the animation. So we're going to move on to our partner members. See, we changed quickly. That's all a good thing. And these were some of the value propositions that that came up during this, during our table sessions. So again, I'm trying to, we'll consolidate. We have to wordsmith this a little bit more in terms of taking all of these ideas and refining them into a couple of terms or a couple of sentences. But I just want to get some themes that bubbled up. Probably the biggest one that we saw in all the table discussions was about the engagement opportunity with the end user and engagement opportunity with the community. I think that came out in about every table discussion out there. Also kind of building knowledge and enhancement of dissemination and kind of this theme of like not reinventing the wheel. And also kind of this alignment, impact, exposure, and kind of this theme of having a one-stop shop for SCI. So again, these were some of the themes that came out in value propositions. And this is going to be a really key one to make sure that we can pull in the partners. So I want to open it up to you all to make sure that we did capture some thoughts or if we were missing some themes that came out from the other table discussions. No, John, do you have a comment?
First things first, I just have to say thank you all, because this is an area that we've all struggled with on the executive council, is trying to define what the value proposition is. And this is some really, really great content. So that's my first only comment.
Taryn? Yeah.
I'm feeling this internal tension. I think there's something we still haven't addressed, and that's about the process for communication, because all of these value propositions really are dependent on a really clear, transparent communication process. And I think that's something that the consortium really needs to give a lot of thought to. Just, you know, in the last year in our province, there's been a lot of expectation from our researchers within the province to utilize us as a recruitment tool to get people involved in studies. And it's quite onerous, and it's becoming beyond our capacity. And my thought is, you know, we really need to think how we, that engagement communication process, it's not enough to just push information out through social media and email and websites. People are inundated with that type of information now. So, you know, I was captivated by what you and Anita were talking about. And I think also we need to build research ambassadors, or I don't know what the right term would be, but we need to build capacity of some of our people in our peer network to be able to reach out by phone or in person at hospitals in the community, because research is really growing very quickly. The demand on people with lived experience is getting huge, and they're going to stop turning their computers on or their email, stop looking at it so we need to be able to screen and determine or you know, refine the criteria. And we try and do that internally in terms of pushing the information out so it only goes to the people it would be relevant to. But there's not the uptake yet. And I think it's because in the communication process, we don't have a way of having ambassadors phone out, meet in person with people. And that requires training, and it requires a bit of a capacity investment in the short term to make sure that happens. So just want to flag that for something for consideration, because we're setting up a lot of values. This value proposition is important. We've got to be able to live up to that value.
Of course, yeah.
That proposition.
That's a great
Definitely.
point. That's a really great point. Penny?
Thanks. I agree completely with you. When I was going through these documents, I thought, oh my gosh, how is this all going to happen? So on the list of, because I'm always saying, okay, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do by next Tuesday? So on the list of where you put your name and said where you could contribute, I put down that I could assist in developing a communication plan within the next 6 months. So it's that we have the theory, now we need to move to action.
And actually,
That's wonderful.
that's a really key point. And if I could just make a comment before we go to the next question or comment that's in the audience. And I think that's something we're uniquely aware of, but I think that I'm glad that it's being pointed out from this group. It is part, if you look at our 3-year plan, really touching on communication, we call it outreach, but really trying to refine that. And I think, you know, for you guys speaking up about it actually helps us bubble it up to the top, but it was definitely something that kind of rose into what we need to do when we're looking at those 3 circles for developing our strategic plan.
And each of you has had experience in your different networks in a smaller or larger capacity. And so if we're trying to create an umbrella, we really need to work together to not overwhelm people, but really get the people involved that want to be involved, or get information to the people that only want information.
Yeah, and I just one other thing to kind of go off of this is that this exercise is really going to help us to refine our message, right? So we've been in this in a year, and we're finding that each one of us, when we go out and try to describe what the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium is, we end up coming up with these kind of different definitions, but they're all very aligned. But this exercise is going to help us try to refine, you know, defining who we are, what we do, and why we're of value in a very distinct way, so we can all communicate that out in a unified message.
Chris, and then Heather.
Okay. I've sort of been wondering when to make this comment, but I think Taryn's comments about the communications probably triggered it, that maybe this is the time. there's so many great ideas and so many things that we can do and we want to do and that are important to do, but like we have to reflect that this is a volunteer alliance, collaboration, whatever you want to call it, with limited capacity. And if we try to do all of these things and we promise all these things, we're going to fail. Like there's no way we can't fail based on the criteria that we're laying out here. And I think it's just really, really important that we at some point very soon try to narrow the scope of what we're trying to achieve in the short term with the objective to getting to more of these things in the long term. Because if we don't win, we don't have success early, we're never going to make it beyond the early stage.
Yeah, actually, that's what, I'm glad you made that comment, Chris, because that's actually what drove us to try to do this for years, was that same, holy moly, we got a lot on our plate and we can go in a million different directions and not get anything done. And how do we help refine that? So I'm glad it's being pointed out. And I think it's something that can help kind of remind us that we need to refine and keep the scope that we can have an appetite for, but also have an impact as well. So thank you for pointing that out.
I want to add just a quick jump on, and I'm sorry, Heather, I'm just jumping ahead of you. That one, I think you saying that made me trigger something, how to say something. There's this other nuance that some of what's happening here, at least and I'm speaking for myself here, breathes into the work that I do at U2FP. And I think likely the work that other people are doing, to the point where for those of you at Working to Walk, I think there were some things breathed into what Working to Walk was in the last 2 days, and particular specific things that I think were fed by this consortium, conversation, dialogue. And I like to think, not to, prescribe anything for the scope, but I like to think that's going to be a part of figuring that out. How are we actually amplifying the work that everyone's doing, as opposed to, stealing energy, or stealing fire? So, sorry.
I think probably my comments sort of build on everybody's thoughts around this, is that I think we need to think about on this list, what are wins that we can have right now and soon, and what are things on this list that we can't actually promise until we've done the things on the list around our members with spinal cord injury or SCI organization. So one of the big concerns that I've spoken to with our IKT guiding principles team is that we can go and promote and advocate and encourage researchers to partner with people with spinal cord injury, but right now we only have so many people that are willing to do that, and we will burn out that group of people, and as a result actually make these research partnerships potentially not work nearly as well and lose capacity rather than gain it. And so I think in terms of prioritizing, I really like the idea of building capacity first and then offering some of these things to the partner members maybe in 3 years. So we have the capacity. Now we can actually guarantee that we can do some of these things for you. And right now we're sort of piloting those ideas or something along that. We wouldn't guarantee it yet.
That's good for helping us prioritize, I think. Yeah.
Is it an online question?
Okay.
Yeah. Online question from Mary Jo. Mary Jo, do you want to go ahead? Oh, Mary Jo.
I kind of backtracked to the ambassador idea and also Anita's presentation with regards to the consultant. And could the consultant not also be the ambassador or the peer that propagates more people?
Yeah, so I think Mary Jo is asking whether the research ambassador identified is
by building certified advocates or specialists that might help build our voice in the future. Microphone, Tim. Microphone. Never mind.
But I think the one thing that we think about, I think, you know, maybe this is what Chris was alluding to a little bit too, is these things cost money. People's time is valuable and expertise is valuable, no matter if you're a neurosurgeon or if you're a dog walker or if you're a person with lived experience that contributes to research. Your time is valuable, and we need to really, I think, figure out that mechanism on how we reimburse the work that's getting done here. Because as Karen said with SCI Alberta, you guys are getting to a point that it's, you know, it's getting untenable. You've got so many requests coming in. So how do we fulfill those requests? We build capacity. How do we build capacity? We bring in more people. How do we bring in more people? We pay them.
I think we might maybe as a group can think about applying for a grant, maybe an educational grant or something like that, where we can build a couple modules, do some test training, and see how it can pilot out. And maybe that would provide resources for us to do that and for our trainees to get that training before we try to expand it out further.
To add kind of another comment to that is that this exercise of value proposition benefit can also help drive us into one of the three circles of financial sustainability. Right? A nonprofit doesn't mean you operate as a nonprofit. We're just not giving back money to shareholders, right? But so we need to come up with revenue or income mechanisms for the organization. So this exercise of looking at value proposition benefits helps us define where are some opportunities that we can have of income. Because the grants, they can take us, but they can only take us so far. We really need to make other revenue sources for the nonprofit to make sure that this keeps going, particularly financially, so we can keep our mission continue alive.
Dennis?
Another thing you'll do, and those of us in research would probably appreciate this, is if you have a cost structure with an indirect percentage that you can, so if I'm putting in a proposal with a plan to have an advisory team in there the whole way through, I can then have a letter of support from NASCIC and a budget outline, and that way there is funds from that project going to the advisory team to NASCIC with overhead, just like any consultation cost. And so if you have a structure that you can, like a cost structure you can come up with, not only does that add some legitimacy and showing you have maybe some skin in the game, but you will get another potential revenue stream that way.
Yeah, and by building those partnerships, you can then plan in other grants to incorporate that into the budget of the grants.
Hi, I was wondering if the training project was intended as a funding stream to charge for the services ultimately?
Anita?
Sorry, when you're asking about the training project, are you talking about the online education? Oh, sorry. So the training modules that we're talking about developing, we're proposing it as a project that we would seek funding for. Well, what we were just talking about at our table, that feeds into the last person that was speaking. I really like the idea of charging the researchers that are approaching us, like for their projects, because we should be recognized no differently than an industry consultant. That's really what we're going to be. We're going to be an industry consultant, providing our expert opinion on how they can make their projects better. And we should be compensated for that.
So I think, yeah, that potentially that could become a funding source, that part of it comes back into NASCIC.
I don't want to throw a terrible wrench in the gears here, but also I've been trying to think about how to raise this for the last hour or so. And maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit by commenting on the three presentations, but the one thing, and I started to think about it very much in you guys' presentation, that the thing that I did not hear was incentive. And we've been tracking in a lot of metaphors. And I was trying to come up with a metaphor. Maybe, I don't know if this will work or not, but I was sort of thinking like, we're the people who love hamburgers. And we're also the people that are like eco-friendly. And so, and health food. So we're the people who love grass-fed hamburgers. And we have a business plan for opening a grass food hamburger shop on the corner. And it's so apparent to us that it's perfect. It's like, it's exactly what we want and exactly what we want to go into business doing. And we're just convinced that it's divine intervention, that when we open that, it's going to go gangbusters. And the problem is that we open it across the street from a McDonald's or down the street from a Burger King. And where is the incentive? The structures are in place that are antithetical to what we want to do currently. Now, having said that, there is some motion of incentive for the community's involvement in research. But I would argue that we're far from having the inherent incentive to make this all work wonderfully. And so, and the thing that I think about is, and I think at U2OP, I think we stumbled on this in some ways by accident, leaning on those who came before us. Our state initiatives, passing the bills in Washington and Minnesota and Pennsylvania, and now Ohio and Wisconsin that we're working on. One of the reasons why it works is because you're going to researchers and saying, we're going to get $1 million for research. But the catch is we get to sit next to you and decide how you're going to use it. And we're going to have to talk about that. And it works. It's working so far. I mean, we're at the front end of it, but there's a built-in incentive. You take that incentive out in each of the states where we've worked, the institutions, not the scientists, the institutions in every state tried to take it away from us because they don't want that. They don't want people from the community at the table making decisions about how money is spent. They just want a blank check. And so I raise this just to say that we have to think strategically and not get caught in drinking our own Kool-Aid. Because at the same time, everything that was presented, I agree with. You know, Rob's presentation, the United Spinal Registry, and you guys is this, I mean, they're all good things, and I fundamentally agree with them. But the missing piece to me is how do we build in the incentive? Because even the MDIC and the registry, for example, yesterday, or day before, I was talking to the NerveGen folks who are sitting in the back of the table that are commercializing Jerry Silver's peptide discovery. And like you always hear with the biotech, well, we're actually looking at prostatectomies and how we could use it in prostatectomies because that's a bigger market. And if we can get that market, then we'll build the infrastructure to go to SCI. And I'm looking at them like, oh, is that so? Is that how it's going to work? Because that's always the conversation. Oh, well, we're going to use, I know you wanted to open a hamburger shop with grass-fed beef, but we have a great chicken distribution network. And I think we can build out, you know, and put the grass-fed beef into the chicken network, and that's going to be the winner. And your grass-fed beef is gone. Right? So I just want to bring it up. Like, we have to think about that before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, good.
Can I ask one thing? Do you have much left on?
No, I just have the member.
On
I don't have the member benefits.
Can I
Okay,
just
because
respond to Matthew real quick?
yes, but I want to keep that conversation going so we can get more into it. But I wanted to see if Jen had anything left.
No, I just had. Oops. There we go. I just had the benefits that came up, and again, the top 4 were the ones that bubbled up from the tables. And I think, and it sounds like what I'm hearing is that we will refine these and we'll send them back out to the members to get your feedback one more time to help us refine that message. Yeah. But I think I want to respond to Matthew because I think, you know, you do love to throw wrenches. That's why we love conversations with you. But I think this makes me reflect on, you know, we held an investor meeting before this, and the topic came up of, you know, spinal cord injury is a market too small for investors. But we all have to say, hey, wait a minute. You know, there's devices, I live in the device world. There's devices that have been put on the market specifically for spinal cord injury. And then they went out to other indications. And why do they do that? Because we're a stable cohort. Because spinal cord injury is stable when it comes to paralysis. TBI is messy, even though it's a bigger population. Stroke is messy, even though it's a bigger population. And the researchers are really looking at spinal cord injury as a stable cohort when they're really trying to address paralysis. And we shouldn't lose sight of that either. So we do have inherent value. And how we use that is going to be the bigger question, right?
So, Matthew, I think you made some really, really good points. And I think creating that incentive is important. But I think we're getting to a point with funders where it's not necessarily about creating the incentive for researchers, it's removing the disincentive. You know, if it's going to cost them extra to do it, they're probably not going to want to do it. But now funders are starting to recognize that there's a cost associated with bringing in lived experience, and they're starting to require it, right? So if we can ensure that it's not a disincentive to bring us in, maybe that's enough of an incentive as it is. And really, I think when it comes down to it, what we're trying to do is ensure that people with lived experience aren't signees to a grant application and then never brought into the equation any further. We want to make sure that they're making a meaningful contribution, because more and more researchers or funders are requiring this as a partnership. We just need to make sure that they're doing it on our terms.
I would like to make a note that one of the largest funders, NIH, is not on board with that. They're not asking their grantees to include people with spinal cord injury. And they are the main funders of this basic science cure research and translational to start a clinical trial. They're the major funders of that, and they are not on board yet.
But they are right now doing an assessment against PCORI-funded projects that are doing that to compare what's more effective, patient-partnered research from PCORI or non-partnered research from NIH. So they're looking into the value in it.
I agree with that, but I was also just at a strategy meeting, and people were saying, when I brought up engaging people in the process of research, oh, that's what PCORI does. We don't do that. That's what PCORI does. Now, PCORI may run out of money because they weren't re-signed into the legislation. So there are disincentives still.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why, for those of you who've heard, I mean, I know I've said it a few times over the weekend, but you know, you just asked me who the major funders are, and it's NIH and Nielsen. And if you collectively grab the state programs, they I think fund a greater amount than Nielsen. I think it's about 30 million as opposed to the 22.5. And the key for us, again, is to rewrite the narrative and challenge the conventional narrative is how do we build a consortium out of that money to say, you have, and not all of them do, so we have to change that as well, but pull the community into that decision-making process and leverage it. And then go to Nielsen or with Nielsen, go to NIH and say, okay, it's time to change your conventional practice.
One of the things,
but nobody's going to do that except us.
Exactly. Do we have a comment here? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I work pretty closely with our community. I do recruitment as well as part of my job. And so when I think about building capacity, I think in our community, people don't even understand what research is. Like, we have to kind of take it way back. And because there's 30 years ago, research was getting done. You know, some of that research is still happening today. And people kind of got pissed off and they lost hope. So they're in now a position where they don't want to be a part of it. So when I think of recruitment and building capacity, I think, how do we get those people involved again? And it's almost like redefining research for them again, right? And it's about, I guess, like what matters to them most, you know? And I know we talk about the bowel and bladder and blah, 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 but I don't think people really get the urgency of that. And when I think of the AIDS movement and people were dying, people are dying in our community too. And there's a huge sense of urgency we need to feel to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have small practical sort of suggestions regarding to creating incentives. For instance, why not NASCIC can be a non-profit that actually create a job for young people. For instance, there's a government funding called Young Canada Support, not exactly, but basically pay full-time salary and for the graduate or some other Canada job or under the grad. And under the scheme, we could actually write a grant to get the 10 very competent, willing young people to be trained as a mentee, mentored by us as an advisory. And that would be very, I think, sustainable solutions so that not only we are creating a job for the youth, but also using that, mobilizing those new cohort to be partner with us as well. So just throwing that, there's a funding government opportunity.
Can you let us know how to connect with that to read more about it? Oh, okay. Ah, excellent.
I wanted to actually add to what Terry said, that just to reiterate that where all the incentives lie, right? Because I think sometimes, I mean, I can't speak for everybody in the room, but I'll use this analogy also this weekend, that I feel like we're all in middle management, you know, and we've all we got out of the labor force and got a desk and we worked 9 to 5, and we forgot what it's like to really slug it around. And I'm not saying everybody has, I'm just saying sometimes there's a little bit of that, like we think at a different level of the organization and we've forgotten a little bit of what it's really like for everybody else. And so we also do have to be thinking about the incentive with regard to our community. And I thought of when we were in Toronto and Michael Failing said, you know, we're here to provide hope for the community. And it was like, no, you're not. You're not here for hope for the community. That's what happened. You know, if you have the researchers' message to you is, you know, we're here to give you some hope that there might be some stem cells 5 years from now. No. You know, and we have to be careful of that as we make any statement to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Right? And maybe one of the best things we could do is reach out to our members, our organizational members, and, you know, we get the pulse on what all of them are dealing with every day. I mean, because we know we make the extra effort to come here, but we know how hard it is to just survive every day, and people are busy trying to do that. And I've tried to convey that sometimes to researchers and scientists, and they don't really get it. And, you know, I've worked with several people, they don't even know what I do during a day. How do you go? You have a problem going to the bathroom, Kim? Really? And these are scientists. So they don't, when they see us out, they don't always see us as people with spinal cord injuries and what we really deal with. So maybe what then we could do is reach out to our members and create something that documents what the real life is and put that forward to scientists and funders and regulators. Right here.
Okay, sorry, just one more thing.
Yeah.
I think we almost did it to ourselves because we became inspirational. And so now the community is like, well, what do you mean you want to have cures? You're like living your amazing life. I go and talk to schools all the time about all the amazing things I do, and your life is not over because you're in a wheelchair,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're inspirational, and we're heroes in our communities.
According
so now,
to
what are we doing? It's very confusing, right? Now,
yeah.
What do you want?
According to Matthew, we've hoarded ourselves out. And we wanted to be treated equal.
So a comment that arose at our table earlier from someone who's newer to our spinal cord injury community is, especially when we compare ourselves or we look at the HIV movement and that cure, that it's a lot about education. So that just follows up, these recent comments perfectly, because the public just, they don't get it. And if we don't start with an education and awareness campaign, then we could be, and this is a bad analogy, spinning our wheels for a really long time. So I think that should be, as we look at these long lists of all good ideas and all things that we really would love to accomplish, each and every one of them, that I would suggest that is one of the priorities.
One of the things that, before we go to you, the Amy Daniels from Conquer Paralysis Now mentioned to me yesterday or the day before, is what if we came together and created a national advertisement, like a public service announcement about that exact thing to get the bigger public aware of it. That might be something. Anita, and then, or what order are we in? Okay.
Thanks, Kim.
Okay.
Just to follow up on Terry's comment, I think a disadvantage that in this community is that there have been so many heroes and so many people who have accomplished so much, whether it's Christopher Breeden or Sam Schmidt or Rick Hansen, all the many people. And when you look at AIDS, they didn't have it. They had to focus. Their message was around the impact of the condition and the disease and around the issues. And I mean, you could say one of the exceptions would be in Canada, the Michael J. Fox cancer. But Michael J. Fox did not raise funds for bone cancer, which is actually what he had. He raised, his money went to cancer generally. So just as Terry Fox, who did I say? Michael J. Fox. We have two Foxes, yes, two Canadian Foxes. Another whole other story about Michael J. Fox. Thank you. But just as we craft our messages, it's so important. Now, also the other side of that is that means to what extent are people prepared to put themselves out there as needing help and move back into that patient mode or the less able mode, because certainly in my case, so much every day is trying to do what other people do and appear able-bodied. So it's a slightly different mindset that may work against us.
I don't think maybe we need to necessarily go back to the patient mode, but getting people to understand. I mean, you see people with cancer and stuff, and they're not necessarily advertising themselves as patients, but that this is a disease that affects so many people. And spinal cord injury is a disease that affects less people, but such a higher economic impact. What order are we in now? Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to touch in on what all of you are saying, because when Barry and I had created our education cure videos, we had done a mini survey. There was only like maybe about 50 people in the survey, predominantly individuals that were chronically injured. And I was really surprised by the results of the study, because we found that people weren't all that interested in cure-related research. They were more focused on care. And I say, I'm trying not to make that divide between cure and care, but they were disillusioned. They had been around for 10 plus, 20 plus years, always hearing about something's in the pipeline. We're almost there. And it didn't happen, or it didn't happen soon enough. And so they're like, I just want to get better, live my life better. So I think when we talk about the building capacity, it's really important that we educate people first and get them excited again about research, because I'm hopeful. I've been in the research arena for a long time, and I do feel like we're at a really exciting point where there are a lot of things happening, but we need to get these individuals back in the game. That's why I said it's so important that we're not just trying to build capacity with our existing members, but bringing in those with new SCI, because we've got that group that's been injured for a long time that we need to reinvigorate. And then we've got the ones that are newly injured that are excited and
really looking for what's out there, what can we do?
We had a question here waiting first. Yeah.
Going with what Terry said, Ability New Brunswick, we a couple years ago, probably 3 years ago now, we put on a campaign to kind of advertise ourselves. So we did a set of video series taking different individuals and kind of telling a short version of their story and putting them out there as community heroes that they had this traumatic thing happen and then gotten on with their life. And it was kind of a catch-22. It put us out there, put our face on the map kind of thing, but it did exactly the opposite for that person, because then people think, well, you're getting on with your life, so what the hell more do you want? So we talked as a board after that of how we could maybe do another series later on, but to also demonstrate that there is still a need. Yeah, we're getting on with our life, but there's a cost associated to that.
Excuse my English, but just to go in this direction, we've been trying in my association for like a long period of time to get people to talk about their life, their real life. And we met a big resistance because people thought, like guys didn't want to talk about their sexual problems, and people didn't want to look like if they were not potentially perfect employees. And I realized that only older people like me, 41 years later, or that we're kind of not shy of talking about our bladder and bowel problems, because in fact we don't have much to lose now, except maybe self-respect, but now we can, but then the reaction is because you're aging, you're old people. So now our spinal cord injured problems become rather people of problem of aging or elderly. So I was wondering, when are we allowed to talk about our real problems or our real needs if it's not during our active life or it's not during our aging time? I'm just saying that because in fact, when you want to recruit people, like for videos, we notice that people nobody wants to look, beaten down, or they all want to look like very glamorous. And it is true that is one of the group of disabled that has the most problem getting across their needs. We don't like to cry. Mm-hmm. We don't like to look miserable, and it is something that we have to think about for future promotion. Mm-hmm.
I want to add to, a few of the things that have been said. We were talking a little while earlier about the troubles with caregivers and how, or one of the problems for supporting caregivers is that our cultures are not very good at helping us learn how to be in relationship to begin with. And when a big catastrophe happens, it's even that much worse. It's sort of amplified the gaps that are in the culture, helping us have good relationships. And another place where that I think is touched on, and you brought it up, how many times have I heard somebody say, well, you need another celebrity, like you need another big celebrity to have an accident. And I'm like, no. Because that's one of the problems in our culture, is that our narratives are all Superman narratives. The hero guy, or the hero woman, or Wonder Woman and Superman. It's rarely, if ever, a team. And what we need is the we, right? That what you're describing is we need what we're talking about at some level, like, and not that it's going to be a policy shift or anything, but it's like we're trying to build a we-ness. a social movement of people, lots of people from the SCI community, and change the narrative. Because there's been a long history of us getting whored out for inspiration porn, right? Either our, look, I jumped out of a plane and see, I can do everything you can do and it's awesome. Or, you know, my life is great. And we've neglected other parts of the story, but the other part simply is that it's about one person. It's about one story. This is about our story. And there's great power in that if we can challenge the cultural narrative that it's got to be somebody's one story, right? So I feel like that's something we can do and can build into a reinvigorating sort of message for the community.
We have about 30 minutes left in this discussion space. And are there anything particular that we want to talk about, the 3 different project proposals specifically, anything that might be unclear or how they, actually Barry and I were just mentioning that maybe that what Anita and John presented and what Heather is working on are actually kind of complementary. Heather's more in the long term, and maybe what can we do in the short term to create some tools for people or some training? Is there a way to be complementary there? Do you want to have a discussion about that? Wait, where's the microphones at? Oh. You guys are just standing with the microphone. Oh, sorry.
I'll give it to you right after, Peter.
Okay.
Heather and I actually kind of like looked at each other across the room at one point when she was bringing up something, and we're both like, okay, yeah, we need to talk. And that's when she said, you know what, I think it's great what we've already started in this first year, and by taking on a few projects just to get our feet wet and see what it's like. But I think it's really important, like Heather was saying, that we need to back up a bit and start from ground one again, because we don't want to run into burnout. And by relying on the same 20 of us engaging in all these projects, we really need to build capacity first, make sure that people feel comfortable with their knowledge level so that they can engage meaningfully. And then we can start looking at bringing on more projects and really expanding our network. So I don't know, I think the 2 of us can talk about, but I think that's really where we need to do, is we really need to start back at ground one.
Mm-hmm. Peter, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to continue this conversation around capacity. And, you know, I've been building networks for people with spinal cord injuries for the last 10 years. And I've made a ton of mistakes trying to figure out what the right formula is. And some of the things that I've learned along the way is that people want to get involved in the things that are solving their problems in the now. And asking people to sign up to be part of a professional research participation platform without the why that's associated to their now doesn't work from my experience. And, you know, when I work with a lot of what we call peer activists across Ontario, some of the messages that they tell me is that, sure, I want to get involved in research, but I don't want to be in a meeting where people are talking a whole ton of things and I just want to get to the outcome, or I want to just share my story, and I'm hoping my story, the researchers can science the heck out of it and can give me direction, because I just want to be able to communicate what I want and what I need and how I can support what people are doing. So when we're thinking about this whole notion of capacity, it has to be a two-way street. It has to solve their immediate needs as well as what the long-term goal is. And I really I hope that people put a lot of thought in that. Because the other thing that people always tell me is like, I want to get involved. I want to get involved in volumes, but you got to set it up for me because I'm working full time. I got kids. I got to take care of my family. Give me that 2-minute elevator speech and give me that call to action, and I'm there with you. But if you're going to ask me to dedicate 12, 15 hours of time in a very diverse way and ask me to take courses and ask me to be trained on stuff, suddenly you're embarking on my day-to-day activities and what I want to do in my life and what I want to try to solve. So my message to everybody is like, really make it simple and not try to boil the ocean. Go after one or two things and not try to make that one individual have to be everything to everyone.
Thanks. Yeah, because we didn't have a lot of time to really clearly define what we were trying to accomplish. But if you recall from the building capacity piece, because I remember the work that you're doing and I remember you mentioning that. So that's where we mentioned when we're trying to recruit members, send out that online questionnaire so they can tell us how they want to be involved. So it's based on their preference, their interest, and their skill set. No, but at least if they indicate to us how they want to get involved, then as we take on projects, we will be able to send those projects out to the individuals that are interested in getting involved in those areas. So we're not sending it out to the whole membership. And you know, trying to avoid, you know, these mass distributions. It'll be sent targeted out to people who are interested in getting involved in those areas.
Okay. Chris,
So,
Chris, you go and then I'll go.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Do you think?
I'm sorry. I've been through a lot of these processes, and a lot of them with someone I look up to, Bill Adair, who's now the executive director of Spinal Cord Injury Canada. And listening to what's going on over the last hour, probably lots of like really interesting ideas and discussion, but it's all over the place. And he would describe this as we're in the groan zone, because there's all this stuff out there and there's no clear path forward. That's kind of a good thing, because what usually emerges from the groan zone is some degree of clarity and some degree of focus. So let's hope we get there. I wanted to just kind of, I'm having a hard time figuring out what the organization is. Is this an advocacy organization? Is this an education-based organization? When I hear about the certification program, then it becomes like a service delivery organization. And I hate the word organization in this case, because I don't think it's an organization. I think it's an alliance of like-minded organizations. And I think that's a really important distinction. So from this groan zone, I hope we can get some clarity about where the focus needs to be to start. Because if we're talking about all these ideas again, we're just not going to get anywhere.
I'd like to ask so that we can give some other time to the registry project and to Rob's project, but these are all very important, and this is such a large topic as well, that we can come together with the comments that have been brought up and really try to work on how do we try to step forward in a clear way before we move forward just by jumping in. So was there a comment before we go to, I want to make sure we give them enough time.
So I've been thinking very similarly actually to sort of Chris and Peter and Anita. How do we move forward in a focused way, and what is the goal of NASCIC? And I was looking at the poster over here, and it's saying that our goal is around supporting collaborative efforts across the spinal cord injury community. And then I would encourage us to go backwards and say, which of these priorities can we get done right now that focus on that goal? And in particular around this idea of getting researchers and research users or people with lived experience working together, is there's some key pieces in what we're talking about. So one is meaningful research. I think we could do a lot of work around what counts as meaningful to this group and what do we want to advocate and push for. And then as well, what are the things that are stopping both our people with lived experience and our researchers being able to do that together? And if we could figure out those two things, we'd actually understand the problem so that we could develop solutions that directly address that problem. Because I think right now we're actually really wanting to create a lot of solutions without necessarily understanding exactly why it's so challenging for everyone at this point in time.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we could just kind of summarize this session, I think, we've had a lot of good discussion. The things that we saw that we put up, and the reason we went through this exercise is that one of the challenges that we have is trying to refine our message, right? And that's why we went through this exercise. So when you look at all the ideas that were up there, those aren't necessarily tasks that have to be done. It's helping us to refine that message so that we can make it very clear that when we come back and as we develop in the next year and we try to recruit members and build capacity, et cetera, is we have the right message of what we are. So I think there was some really good discussion here. And I think this gives us food for thought to go back, refine our strategic plan. And if you look back from what we did this morning, was here are the action items that we think we could take on for the next year. It's not as daunting as all of those things that we put up there. So we're really trying to, we hear you, and we're really trying to make sure that we refine the resources into specific areas. So I think this was a great discussion. We're going to go back and take what you guys have given us in this morning session and this part of our afternoon session and refine that and try to come up with something better. So really this was an exercise to help engage the members to make sure that we're getting the feedback from you. So now I want to hand it over to Kim, because you're going to change direction.
No, actually, this was a combined discussion.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, everyone was starting to bring in the engagement project into this whole thing.
Okay.
So actually, I want to give time now for people to talk about the registry project that Jane presented with the 21st Century Cures Act and potentially developing an advisory group to get SCI on the table or on the radar of that. Do people have questions or thoughts related to that? Unclarity, what's the desired role of NASCIC? Anything? Jen?
So I just have a couple questions for you. I'm just wondering if you're working with any other organizations at all as well, like with MS.
Wait, microphone.
Sorry, my other question is just working, like I'm trying to think of this as a North American, like how is this, I know you said with the spinal cord or Rick Hansen registry, maybe combining forces, but if there's a broader vision for North America.
So I would say that would certainly the data that could be developed from some of these research points could have a broad implication for everyone across both, all of North America and the world really, but certainly any data that comes from it, I think, could be applicable to researchers with an interest. We're constantly contacted at United Spinal for information on a variety of things, and we often have to say that, the incidence is extrapolated from many studies. There's no clear data. A lot of the information is collected, the model systems database in the United States, again, is collected from leading SCI rehabilitation hospitals. And certainly, how does that data compare to people who are not treated at those centers, for example, or for people who have non-traumatic causes? So certainly, I think it could have broad implications for everybody across both.
And I think one part of your question, Terry, was, are you reaching out to like the MS societies to branch together?
So we have not actively yet, but I know that Alex, who's our VP of Government Relations, is reaching out to other organizations now, but there haven't been any discussions yet. But we do know that some of these organizations have already initiated some discussions with CDC. So we believe that we also should be there. So.
Great, thanks. So just three very, very quick thoughts on this is, what a great value this would be to have SCI at the table. I think we mentioned this yesterday about faster cures and
SCI isn't even at the kitty table, but this gives us a chance to be in a database. One of the things, secondly, one of the things we know is that we use these statistics out of the model care system. This can give us so much more value, not only for researchers, but I think our own community, to really know what the profile is of people that are spinal cord injured and really kind of learn about who we are, because we truly don't have statistics on that.
Absolutely, and we're constantly contacted by people who have not had that kind of rehabilitation experience, and so you can only surmise that their outcomes are not going to be the same as the people treated in those systems.
Exactly, and I think the other exciting thing about this project that you have is it's actually appropriated funds, right?
Right.
There's appropriated funds to make this happen. Now, are we going to get paid to be involved with it? I don't think that's probably in the appropriation bill, but at least there's funding to make this happen, so
Exactly.
it would be good for us to be at the table.
Right.
Do we have a question online? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah, this one's from Mary Jo. She just wanted to add to the idea of a public campaign. What if we also made a public campaign on how exciting all the latest discoveries and research is, so that not only do we educate on SCI, but we exploit the latest research discoveries and drive community engagement?
Yeah, something that would be helpful if we could get spinal cord injury included in a registry where not just the newly injured get entered in, but all of us that are out there in the community get entered in. Then we could really have a much more accurate number of the people that are living, at least in the US, but then maybe that could be, those kinds of data points could then be, we could learn how to add them to the other countries, so that we know in North America how many people are truly living with SCI. Then you have an even more powerful basis for these national advertisement campaigns and public service announcements and things like that.
So I wanted to just make a comment and then ask a question. One is to echo what you said, Jen, that, and I think maybe we even talked about this in our state initiatives. The first thing I did in Minnesota was call the Department of Health and figure out, the census, the registry that didn't exist, and the same in Washington, same in Pennsylvania, and figure out what those numbers are. And so having that would be enormously helpful to make that case to the legislature. Here's how many people, and then you combine. I was combining it with the UAB statistics to say, here's how much we're spending, and here's what it looks like, employment, etc. How critical that is. So just as an emphasis. The second question is back to incentive. I don't think it was mentioned, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there are a number of entities that would have the incentive to know what those numbers are in business, have a business case, Medtronic or Coloplast, or, and the list goes on. And I'm wondering, has that been discussed or explored, that how do you leverage that incentive to pay for or help or provide resources or information to get at the end
Certainly
result?
agree that would be a huge potential. At United Spinal, we have not discussed it yet because the funding was just appropriated at the end of September, so there hasn't been a lot of lead time to get us on board yet.
Two questions, yeah.
And to go back to having a registry, Matthew alluded to UAB. Currently, when a pharma company is developing a clinical trial, they always start with what is the incidence? What are our numbers? What are we looking at? How many subjects do we need to enroll? All they have to go back to now is the UAB numbers, or they go to the model system numbers, and it's not accurate. Right now the number that everybody is banking on is 17,000 new cases per year, or whatever that number is. And for them to have a better understanding of what is really out there, to guide them in their design of clinical trials, maybe we can let's do a smaller scale study, 10 patients instead of 60 patients. It may be so much easier, or to have that knowledge and to have that background. And then this is just a really off the cuff thought, but I was thinking of what Mary Jo said about a national campaign. Remember years ago when, was it ALS that did the ice bucket challenge?
Mm-hmm.
why can't we start something like that? You know, I think about that all the time. You know, who's it going to take? I don't have an idea. What should it be? You know, pie in the face or something, whatever it is. But let's start thinking about that, and that would get a lot of awareness out there on Facebook and all the social media sites. If we could start a fundraising campaign similar to that, it would, like Terry said, we need to reinvent the wheel or recreate excitement again.
Yeah, we can have it. How long does it
Yeah,
take?
just following up on the public message and PSA, our message and our focus is always paralysis. Yes, it happens to the individual, but it also happens to the family. So we all have families that surround us and support us, and they're all impacted by this injury. And more importantly, my philosophy is that there is, to help raise awareness for folks, there is 1 degree of separation for any one of us. We all able-bodied, we all know somebody who's been impacted. So that in itself, in addition to the quantifiable numbers, that's a qualitative something that we should be messaging to let people know how prevalent this actually is, not just in their community, in their circle, but in the world.
I agree with that. And then you can really get to the true economic cost of what this is incurring. John?
Yeah, so I don't know if everybody knows, but I work at the Rick Hansen Institute. We've got a pretty significant registry that's been going for quite a while. And, you know, to follow up on Matthew's comment, you know, when we're doing economic analysis or we're trying to make justification to governments or healthcare systems, you know, the having accurate data is one of the most valuable advocacy tools you can have. So I highly, you know, applaud the fact that you're going about creating a more stronger data set, because there's a few in the United States, but they're all sort of disparate. There's not a real comprehensive one. And then what was my second comment was going to be? I don't know, can't remember.
Okay, then I'll switch. If I want one more question, and then I want to switch and give time to Rob's study. Taryn? Yeah.
I just want to build on John's comment. So in Alberta, we're doing a pilot of a little bit of a modification to the Rick Hansen registry for community follow-up. And it's using it not just as a tool to collect information that can inform researchers and research projects, but also as a quality improvement tool. So, you know, we've partnered with the foundation and with the clinicians and researchers in Alberta. We're collecting that data now through our team of people that are working closely in the community. So I think, I hate to see people reinvent a wheel. We'd be very happy to share all of the information in terms of how that got tweaked a bit to work in the Alberta context, and also working to see how the information that goes into the global research platform can also go into a Government of Alberta platform in terms of informing policy in a better way. So happy to share that with you.
Thank you.
And just so you know too, in Canada, there is an MS registry, there's a stroke registry, there's a neuromuscular registry. So I think because those are all at different stages over the last 10 or so years, or 12, good to sort of find out lessons learned from them.
So I want to make sure we have time for Rob's proposal to have questions. And while Rob is getting the microphone on, I want everyone to notice that I put up the definitions that Anita and John and Barry had come up with. And one of the potential things, you guys can read these, and I think we can maybe go through them either after Rob's discussion or via email. But I think NASCIC really should make a position statement on what we think that these definitions are and when they should be used. So you can read those while we're going through in the discussion now. So Rob, does anybody have? We're going to switch gears. Anybody have any questions or comments related to Rob's proposal? Taryn.
Hello, Rob. My question is, if you have any future studies to recollect that sort of data that you're getting? Because sometimes the research priorities change for people over time.
I think, everything's out on the table right now. The overall goal of this right now is to create a framework for this patient preference study. So, and I think when we get a larger number of people surveyed, you'll be able to extrapolate, what is the priority over time of their injury. So, yeah.
Jen, you have some questions?
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. So, Rob, you mentioned not only the FDA, but you also mentioned NDIC. So are both of those agencies on board with this? Have they already agreed to take part in this?
So we've talked to MDIC. Matthew and I have been there. I've talked to them. I don't know who's talked to them more, but I think it's something that if we can bring it to the table with funding and everything, they're game. But their objective was mainly to create a framework, and I think that MDIC would be happy to bridge the relationship with the FDA. Talked to Jeffrey Sharon a couple of years ago, right when he became the director of the CDRH, and he was interested. This was before the Fox trial publications came out, but it's something that I know they're excited about, and yeah.
So is the
I was going to quickly, the way that I would answer the question is that at least both in the conversations we've had with MDIC and my conversations with them, they would love to share knowledge. They would love to share what they learned about this process and be supportive in that way, almost like, I'm being, is implied, sort of consultant role. Beyond that, I can't say what, and there has, unless you have, from me, there's been no conversation with FDA.
So there's been no conversation with it. So my question is kind of a follow-up question is that, so are you trying to gather patient preferences for what? Because if you say we want patient preferences, well, I'll tell you a lot of things that I want, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so how are you going to refine that? I mean, and you're mentioning CDRH and MDIC, which alludes to the fact that you're trying to focus on a device. Well, what device? So I think there's some of these key questions that you can't really do a broad study. It needs to be refined, and I just don't hear that. And if you can clarify that, I think
this is all up to the advisory council. The way that I vision this is that we create the base and the framework for the spinal cord injury community to be ready for when device makers are ready to submit to the FDA. So they would come to us, ask for us to send this device-specific survey out to our data bank, and we'd be able to get them results on something, the questions that they're specific to that device. And, so a lot of it's preparation for potential treatments. And I would think that the advisory council would probably be able to determine, what's the meaningful, is this, are we going to interview every time a new catheter comes on the market, or wheelchair, every model of wheelchair, or, maybe just one survey of a wheelchair, or an epidural stimulator, the GMS stimulator, or so on. So, but, and funding from that, it's something that needs to be shaped up, but I think it needs a jumpstart from our community to get it started and get that conversation going.
So I'm going to say the elephant in the room right now is that, we're a pretty small organization, and I heard this in the conversations earlier, is we're still capacity building. And if you look at our budget, this is a pretty high budget, high capacity project. I'm a little concerned that we're going to be able to take that on if we take a project process. We promise that. That's my biggest concern right now is we're trying to build capacity and build dollars just to try to keep our infrastructure going. And if we take on a project like that, are we sucking the efforts out of infrastructure to go after a patient engagement project where we might be able to get other sponsors and get organizations like CDRH who have funding to do this type of stuff, and engage them.
I want to give a little bit of a background about what Michael J. Fox Foundation did with MDIC. Michael J. Fox Foundation already had this insight study ongoing about the progression of Parkinson's. So they already had thousands of people in this online prospective database. And then they partnered with some members of MDIC and they actually took about 2 years to create a hypothetical deep brain stimulation device for Parkinson's. And they designed risk questions based on known risks of DBS and benefit questions based on known benefits of DBS. And then they queried a very large number of people with Parkinson's, some that had very severe Parkinson's, and some that had very mild Parkinson's. And from the very complex statistical analysis, they identified that in this hypothetical situation, people that had really severe Parkinson's were willing to take greater risk than people that had really mild Parkinson's. So that was, and the FDA was involved in that process. And so that was a hypothetical situation based on real data that the FDA said, okay, well, now if this was a real device, we might take this different statistical proportion into consideration when we're making an approval on that device. So I think we have to have a very specific thing that we're asking risk and benefit about in order for the FDA to really consider it.
Yeah, but I mean, I think preparing for this and laying out an initial study, for an example of what we can do, I think is, and I'm not saying we do it today, it's going to take time to do it. But the starting steps are to build an advisory committee of volunteers, and maybe not everybody on that committee is in the room today, but we definitely, I would encourage that we start looking into this more as a community. So.
We have more questions for Rob? Up here has anybody had a chance to read these different definitions? John, you have those in the back for the online participants? Is that what you're waving?
No, I was just saying that in their meeting package, it's
Oh.
there. But, let me see if I can pull up this slide here. But yeah, just wanted to make sure everybody knows. The one that's in your package includes another definition as research partner, which isn't up on the slide on the screen. So just in case you're wondering why it looks a little different, there are 2 different versions.
Did you add that in last minute?
Yeah, we had a bit more of a discussion and wanted to make sure that partner was included in that. A partner is fundamentally different from a participant.
So is everyone, and I know we all have I want actually a diverse conversation, because do people have opinions? I mean, so we've been saying different words actually over the last 3 days. Some people say consumers, some people, a new term, Plex, is coming out, and you hear a lot of scientists and clinicians call everybody patients. And kind of the idea is that, which actually Anita mentioned in one of her slides, we all play a lot of different roles, and sometimes we play all of these different roles. And so these are actually some definitions about when is it appropriate to call somebody this. And if we were to put out some sort of a position statement on this, then we have something hard that the research community and our partners that we want to be engaging with know that this is one of our terms. This is what we want. These are the things we want to be called when we are playing different roles. So let's have some conversation on this. Microphones. Where are the microphones?
So I'm curious, as a person with lived experience, are we meaning that to only include in this area people with living with spinal cord injury, or are we also including, say, a family member who has a lived experience as a caregiver, or is it more inclusive, or are we solely talking about people with spinal cord injury in that case?
I would like to give Anita the opportunity to answer this because she's the one that actually told me about this term, I think from the brain injury world.
Yeah, so Plex actually originally came out through a brain injury, and that's what they defined their individuals with lived experience. So we are talking about people with spinal cord injuries. And part of why we've decided to go with that term is let's keep it, let's have consensus. So if brain injury is already using that word, why don't we adopt it as well? But it does specifically refer to people with spinal cord injury. The SCI community now includes all of the family friends who, yes, have lived experience through osmosis, I guess you can say, but this is more to define. So instead of, hearing about patient-centered care or the consumer perspective, we're trying to move away from that because we're not consumers in this respect. We're not patients, we're not sick. We're individuals with lived experience providing our experience.
And here, as you mentioned, number 4 down, SCI community is that network. And so maybe in our mission statement, we might need to redefine SCI community in that respect with respect to this.
Yes, and I would, as a family member with lived experience, I would say that I don't fit. I wouldn't put myself in that SCI community. I think there's a distinction.
What would you
say that I'm a flex?
A flex?
Yeah. So
what would Tim?
Flex, and I'm a flex. I'm a family member with lived experience because I don't think that's the same as an SCI focused community organization or advocacy group, because I don't ever leave that experience.
I have a question. Flex, would you have any opposition to being lumped as a caregiver? Like we have opposition to being lumped as patients?
Yeah, I actually don't like the term caregiver either, because I think of the people who've been caregivers for my son. They have even remotely in the same universe of connection to spinal cord injury that I do, because it's my son, my family.
Hi, just feeding off of the terms that you were using with patient and consumer. I have trouble with those. I think we need to go more onto the Plex or different terms, because as soon as you call someone a patient, you're kind of putting them down and saying that they're not going to get better or that they have a continuing problem, which they do, but we need to be more uplifting, I think, than to just, we're not calling them consumers so much, but patients bothers me. So to move on to Plex or something else, I think would be great.
And not to be sarcastic, Matthew, but Flex, I mean, like what would you adopt that? Family with lived experience? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying I would carve out
another
category. But because I don't think the others adequately describe it.
Do we have
And
more?
I would suspect other family connection.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. But first, I personally hate acronyms. But persons with lived experience, I think that justifies saying persons with lived experience, not an acronym. So I really like that. And I do think family members deserve their own family members with lived experience. Everything else, has a bold title. It's not an acronym. So
And I didn't quite get the X. What does the X mean in a Plex?
Experience. Oh, EX, experience.
Yeah, oh, okay, yeah. That's why I don't like acronyms. I never get them.
Yeah.
Get bent a little.
And we've been using persons with lived experience in our province for years now, and it's really well embraced across the continuum.
Uh-huh. More comments? What was that? Flex.
I just have two tiny thoughts. So one, I really appreciate having these, and this is from a very practical researcher perspective. Having a set of definitions for researchers that they can go to when they're writing a grant or a paper that sets the standard is hugely helpful. So I appreciate it from that sense. And then on the research community one, I would love if we could add trainees there. Because I actually think that trainees are going to be one of the areas where we make a huge difference in how we build capacity for doing research and partnership. So just to add them in.
And what do people also think about the healthcare community? Is anybody missing from there? Because that's something that I just kind of added when Anita had asked me for some feedback. The things that came to me were physicians, therapists, nurses, social workers, hospital systems, insurers. So those people that are working in partnership to deliver medical care and adopt new medical. What about DME providers or industry? Okay. Well, so where would caregivers fall in here? Would we need to modify SCI community? I know insurers don't really work in partnership either.
Kim, there's one that's not on the slide that's on the paper versions, which I added just before printed.
I'm going to get to that in just 1 second because I wanted to get feedback on that one too.
Under healthcare community.
Oh, under healthcare community.
Yeah, is that allied health.
Oh,
So,
allied health.
You know, those outside of physician and nursing, so your OTs, your PTs, the whole gamut there.
Jess, are you getting these notes? Okay, good. Chris.
I never really liked the word community because it kind of doesn't mean anything anymore. But if we define it, it's fine. But I guess when it comes to SCI community, like I think in BC, I think we think this way anyways. Like it's everybody that touches spinal cord injury. So it's industry, it's research, it's healthcare, it's all of these things. And so, but it just feels very exclusionary when we do it this way. But I understand the need for definition. And if the group feels that that's representative, that's fine. But I just felt compelled to make that statement.
Well, what do we want to say about SCI community? Shelley?
Hang on.
I had a question that's not related to the community thing, but I guess like Taryn, my question is about acronyms. Under research community, I don't know what REB is.
Research Ethics Board.
Ethics Board.
Research Ethics Board. We can define that. Research Ethics Board.
Thank you.
Shelley and then Taryn.
I had the same thought under research community. REB, we have IRBs in the US, institutional review boards.
We can add that.
But under research community, a newly injured, spinal cord injured patient is in the hospital. If they decide to participate in a research protocol, they now become a subject.
Yeah.
A research subject. So
participant.
We call them subjects, whether they're acute or chronic, once they're in a clinical trial.
Yeah, I don't think that these were meant to be exclusive definitions. You don't necessarily need to fit into only one spot. You can fit into multiple spots. So, you know, one of the other, if you look on the paper, there's research partner. You can be a research partner while you're being a research participant, while you're being an advocate.
Can you define research partner, because we don't have that up here in case anyone doesn't have
it? It's in your meeting package. If you look in your folder, it's in there just below research participant, which we define or propose to define as an organization, as organizations or individuals who work in partnership with researchers to define and answer research questions. These partnerships can exist throughout the research continuum or in any part therein, and are defined by their allowance for shared contribution from all stakeholders.
Okay, then go ahead with what you were saying. Are you done with what you were saying?
Yep.
Oh, okay. But I think to your point, Shelley, we need to stop physicians from saying patients in research studies, because that just confuses people. And they expect to have a specific benefit to them as in medical care when they're really in, and especially in phase 1 trials, you can't guarantee anything. Taryn, yeah.
I really resonated with Chris's comment, and I wonder if it's helpful to have this entitled Defining the SCI Community, and then you can eliminate community from those other more specific.
Yeah.
And then just in regards to the transition away from subject, I know if I had an injury tomorrow and was asked in a month to participate in research, I would really have a hard time accepting that I was a subject. I know that's very common in terms of past practice, but this is our opportunity to
move forward.
Move forward. So I really like research participant resonates much better.
Okay.
I just want to add one little, maybe this doesn't need saying, but just important to reiterate that words are really important.
Yes.
And they, in many ways, define reality. So if I was to say fake news, like, like that's a new phrase that has redefined American political reality, right? Sorry, whatever it doesn't matter. I think you get the point. And that, so in that regard, words, not that we should spend the rest of the evening, because I want to get to I'd like to have a drink, but it is important for us to kind of hack out what these words mean. And sometimes they may be aspirational, like research partner, right? That's sort of like writing a new job description that doesn't exist. Or I'll let it go, but I'll argue community similarly, and it doesn't have to be that word, but there are certain words that you are trying to create a new reality. And that's a really important thing to do, an important exercise.
I think this has two more comments real quick, and then we're gonna, Barry, you're gonna come up with some final things on our voting.
Mine's like half a comment. So I've used like volunteer or human participant.
I want to add something, Gary.
Okay. I'll just switch in.
Heather, and then up here, yeah.
Okay, just to add complication at the end and be the thing.
Just give it a couple minutes.
So the one thing I'm having troubles with is the research partner. And the reason for this is that it says organizations or individuals who work in partnership with researchers to define the research question and answer it. And in my lab, if you define and answer a research question and you are a person with a spinal cord injury, you are a researcher and you are on my team and you are a co-author of what I do, and I don't see you as different from me. And so I'm having troubles with whether or not research partner essentially creates a power dynamic or if it creates clarity. And I don't know the answer, but I felt like I needed to stir the pot on it.
Heather, can I ask you to share your magic water with the rest of the world? So that everybody can have that same vision hearing. We have a comment up here, and then we have a comment online, and then Barry is going to come up here. Rob's aunt. I'm sorry.
Sally. Okay, I'm going down this, and maybe I'm way off, but in taking this trip, I'm wondering about a whole different realm of community people, like hotel people. That ramp is ridiculous. I mean, my undergraduate degree was therapeutic recreation, and there's no way I would design anything like that. And just getting into buildings, and the restroom out here has no stalls for handicapped ladies. just little odds and ends going on, but I just think that we need to somehow or other, maybe not in this group, but someone needs to work with different architects and people that design airplanes. The ramp they put Rob on was wider than the aisle. I mean, it was like 2 inches wider. And so they're going like this, and this poor guy is bounced all over. And so there's so many things that need to be done. And I don't know if we need one more list for everyone else.
Everybody else.
Architects and community workers and things like that.
The world community.
Thank you.
Okay, John,
yeah.
Our online question.
Yeah, this is Alton. We're going to see if we can get the microphone down to the computer and hopefully not get some feedback. So, Alton, you have the floor.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was hearing about, especially for the term of SCI community, and something that I feel is that throughout the years, more people get empowered to talk to advocate for themselves. So I really feel that there has to be, Plex is a good definition, but I feel that there's a need that there's a term that defines the person that is in the situation and their family. So there was someone that commented that SCI community involves also researchers, everything that deals with the SCI community. But I feel that there's a need that the people can see that there's a term specifically for them, that they can know that they have a space to talk for themselves about what they feel it's important for them. So if SCI community involves people with SCI and all of the other groups, some people can feel daunted that they don't have a voice, or that their voice get smaller from the rest of the group. So that is one of the things that I want to comment it, adding, so that we can know that we really have to take in consider that people think that their voice doesn't matter. But if we can create a space that they can feel that they are permitted to speak, I think it can also help that they could be more empowered to participate in more stuff.
Can you summarize that, John?
Yeah, so I think Alton was looking for more of a, Alton, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you were looking for more of a catch-all for people that are interested in spinal cord injury or involved in spinal cord injury but don't really feel like they fit into any of those particular definitions.
Okay.
To make sure that they don't feel excluded from the conversation. Alton, is that correct? And if that is correct, could you maybe give us an idea of a term that you think would capture that?
Yeah, so the thing is with the SCI community, that that would be specific for people with SCI and their family. If you include more other types of organization or more other types of people, the person that has a spinal cord injury can feel more excluded or more daunted because it's in a group with so many other people. I'm not sure if I explained it clearly.
Creating a group that is the Plex and the Flex basically together.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. We could work on a terminology for that.
And Mary Jo, I think you put your hand up. Did you have a question as well? Mary Jo? No.
Yeah, no, I just put my comments up. That's all. And I was trying to get your attention for Alton.
Okay, do you want to maybe just share what your comments were? Because there were, for me, on the commentary, I didn't quite catch what you were trying to say.
I think that participant is an important one, and that was mentioned for the research component. And I don't know if we can redefine patient as participant, or sorry, shoot, where is it here? Yeah, no, that was it. That was all I had. And I just also wanted to say that I really agreed with Matthew's comments about having the family members included. I think that that's a really important piece.
Matthew's standing with his hands up, doing a little dance. So There you go.
Come on up here. Oh, you got a microphone? Matthew, microphone. So Barry has some revisions that we can add to our voting card and see if we might vote on some revised proposals.
Based on the comments that we heard earlier, and I guess the discussions throughout the day, I'm not sure if we completely satisfy everybody on this, but I think we're in a position where maybe I can best explain it. On the proposed charter amendment. So to the first amendment that's proposed, this is Article 1 in the mission statement where we've added the word cure. What I propose to do to go with that cure addition is in our glossary, which is part of our bylaws, is a definition of cure that's been adopted by Unite to Fight Paralysis, and I'm going to read this out. So it's the restoration of one's fully functional and healthy body, including relief from pain and spasms, return of bowel, bladder, and sexual function, and recovery of normal sensation in addition to motor control, period. Once cured, a person should be able to live independently, free of assistive devices, caregivers, catheters, etc. That is the proposed definition in the glossary. Ms. President, I'm not asking for any comments. That is what I'm proposing. We can vote yay, nay, or no, or if you want to direct us to kind of revisit the subject, we can do that too. Item number 2, this deals with the issue of the membership and the fees and that total amendment. I think my position from what I'm proposing to the body, the assembly, is that we adopt the proposed language that was in your materials and with the reminder that it is a mechanism that we are not deciding today or even tomorrow whether we're charging fees or what type of fees and when we're charging fees, but just allowing the executive council the ability to actually implement a fee structure at some given date or time. Right now, that does not exist. It just sort of puts it out there and it gives a timeline. So that is my second proposal for a change. Thirdly, under the articles, when they talk about advisory membership, from what I heard today, we changed that advisory membership definition to partner. And we remove that we rely on the partner to offer us advice or be advisory, but they would partner with the organization and replace the language there. Again, and we've also, I think we've made a statement on the reimbursement policy, and I didn't hear any feedback really one way or the other. So those are the 4 proposed amendments that I urge all of us to think about and to then vote on and submit your ballots, and we can go from there. Again, you have the option of wanting more clarification as well, and then we can revisit it. If there's a consensus that we just didn't nail this thing, but if we know right no, we absolutely will revisit it. And if there's a no, then we will listen to the group. And if there's a yes, we'll listen to the group. That's what we do.
So if you don't want it at all, vote disapprove. But if you want it with the revision that Barry just suggested, vote approve upon revision. And we have in the back, John.
One little thing that I noticed, sorry, we good? Yeah. One little thing that I noticed on the reimbursement policy was that it's 54 cents per kilometer/mile. I think we need to define, is it kilometers or miles, or do we have a set rate in kilometers in metric countries and a set rate in miles for travel within the United States?
I think we discussed on the last executive council when we were discussing it that it's in Canadian funds and it's kilometers. Jessica, did you have more? Canadian, yeah. Yeah.
The problem is in the document right now it says kilometers/miles.
So
kilometers a lot shorter than a mile. So if that's me, I'm claiming in kilometers every time. So just want to make sure we.
Wait. Oh,
We need a microphone.
I can't hear.
Microphone.
Matthew or.
Okay. I would go with like, the federal government sets a per diem for gas mileage. At least
But
in the
is this
States.
what the mileage is rate? The 54
So,
cents per kilometer?
Instead of saying like 54 cents, we just say whatever the federal market rate is.
Oh. Does
And
Canada
go by the respective country.
Well, no, I think we want to, because CSRO is operating in the Canadian system, that we need to operate there, but at least while CSRO is housing us. But does Canada have a federal reimbursement language?
Yeah.
It's 54 cents all the time? Oh, right now.
I really like Rob's suggestion that it be depending on which country we're in. If we're in Curacao, it should be whatever the standard rate in Curacao is. Because again, the cost of mileage is dependent on the cost of fuel and all that sort of stuff. So I propose that it should take out the exact figures and just put the current reimbursement rate as set by that federal agency or something like that.
I actually agree with that too, Kim. Because at least in Canada and the United States, we know that there's a federal rate that's been set by the IRS and the CRA.
Yeah. Okay, so for current purposes, because we actually have not ever reimbursed anybody, but for current purposes, can we edit the document and say, based on the Canadian guidelines, because it's in Canada right now, and can we go back and revise it? Okay. So that can be the revision to the reimbursement portion. And then the last part, I didn't hear any real changes suggested for the project selection guidelines. So you could just vote approve or disapprove.
And also, it was pretty quick and we didn't really get a chance to get into too much detail and depth. So if you guys have any recommendations or suggestions, you want to send them to us offline, highly appreciate that.
So we are right at 4 o'clock. Yay! So we have cocktails and networking reception in the Cedar Brook room. And I would like to get a photograph of everybody. Do we want to do it in here or do we want to do it? Oh, oh yeah, right in front of the sponsor slide. We can move this table out of the way. So before we go and get a drink, can everyone please come up here?
And,
yes.
And as well, I'd really like to make sure that we acknowledge and thank our friends online and our members who took the time out of the day to join us. Would you guys like to say
Tim.
anything
Tim.
in going goodbye or anything like that? Anybody have any comments?
My name.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you. And it's going to be interesting to see how we'll keep moving and the impact we're going to have SCI community, not only in North America, but also in the Caribbean.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. That was great work, and it's a real honor to be involved.
All right, guys, thanks. We're gonna shut down the online. We look forward to hearing more from you in those days and weeks and months to continue.